So far, humanity's efforts to combat climate change will deliver us a 3 to 5 degrees Celsius global warming by the end of the century. What does that mean? Well, try 3 degrees increase in body temperature, and you will have a big fever. At 5 degrees or more, you'll probably be dead. In financial terms, 3 degrees means more than $500 trillion in global economic damage. Now, 500 trillion definitely sounds like a lot, and I don't understand that, but it actually is more than all the wealth, property, debt, everything in the world today. In the words of David Attenborough in Davos recently, we're destroying the natural world and with it ourselves. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Tunayde, one of the Turkish words I know, I hope. I welcome you today to the CDP Turkey Climate Change Conference, and we're not here to talk about the future effects of climate change. We are already living in a climate crisis, as we just heard before, a humanitarian crisis. So we're here to talk about the actions needed right now to prevent its worst effects and build an economy sustainable in the long term. The context of today's meeting is no longer urgency, but emergency. Luckily, the math to prevent the worst effects of climate change are simple. There are 2 deadlines. 2020, when emissions have to peak, and 2050, when our economy must be zero emissions. But this year, global emissions have once again peaked. The last 4 years have been the hottest on record, with extreme weather across Europe, across the world, and it shows us that climate change is here now. And we also live in a challenging political environment. Just look at the yellow vests in France, the Brexit fiasco, Mr. Trump. Neither are we on track to meet SDG 6 for clean water, nor the New York Declaration on Forest, which aims to cut in half forest loss by 2020. The latest COP in Katowice in Poland salvaged international momentum, but it didn't build on it. To borrow a phrase from the IPCC, hitting our clear deadlines will take a wholesale and fundamental transformation of our economy and society. That will take a level of cooperative action between companies, investors, cities, states, and governments that we have not seen in the history of humanity. Now, luckily, the people sitting in this room are the people with the answers. The companies, recognized as among the best in the world for transforming their business and who can lead the way to go much further. The investors, challenging the orthodoxy, showing how change can happen and we can build a more liquid market and sustainable investments. And the policymakers, responsible for refining the rules of the game for our financial and economic system that is currently failing us. Together, you play the central role in driving this transformation to ensure all of our well-being and prosperity. CDP is honored to support these conversations today and over the years. I look forward to hearing of you pioneers, what you have to offer, and the debate what will be done to align business and public policy with a 1.5 degree world, and how to create a financial system that shifts the trillions required. For many businesses and investors, that transition is already on the way. Faced with emergency, 2018 was a momentous year for climate action, and that's why today is also a celebration. a celebration of the leading companies and investors whose actions are doing the most to drive our continent's transition to a new model. And I say continent on purpose because half of all global awardees are based in Europe, and in our European report we don't include Turkey yet, but I'm discussing with Mihan, maybe we should change that going forward with your help. But Europe is truly leading the transition and showing what's possible, given the fact that Europe has already also invented this problem originally. So I've brought a couple of quick slides from the Europe report that I can show you, but Miran will go much more into detail about Turkey later on. So very briefly, about 860 companies are disclosing to CDP in 24 European countries, not Turkey at the moment, and that represents a little bit more than 2,400 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions on scope 1 and scope 2. And to put that in real terms, that's more than the emissions of Germany, UK, and France combined. More interestingly, though, those companies have reported emission reductions of 85 metric tons CO2 equivalent, which is equivalent to the emissions of Austria, roughly. So what we'll hear more about Turkey, much more interesting, but on a European scale, 80% of companies have identified climate risk as a fundamental risk to them. Even more so, nearly 90% when it comes to forest and deforestation risks, and even more, 92% when it comes to water-related risks, droughts. And you just to name that figure, just on the water issue, those companies have identified a price tag of 4 billion euros from water-related risks and damages. So I'll go really quickly, but nearly 40% of companies in this sample are using climate scenarios to make strategic decisions going forward. That's quite encouraging, but it needs to be more, of course. It needs to be 100%. And then 25%, a quarter, have identified the transition risk that I just mentioned as having a big impact on their company. I actually have a ticker here. So here you just have it shown in a slightly different way, but those companies are seeing both physical and transition risks. If you just look at the short or the medium term, those are the key risks. Over 50% in terms of transition risk see climate change as a huge risk, as a huge transition risk. If you compare that to any type of risk, it's the majority. It's the big one in the room. The flip side, or the positive side, is also companies identify big opportunities, huge opportunities. There's the obvious ones, of course, resource efficiency, energy sources, where you're sourcing your energy. That's, in a sense, business as usual. But 71% of companies are seeing huge opportunities with their products and services going forward, how they develop their business model, how they develop their products going forward. And finally, I think Simon mentioned it before, roughly 40% of companies are adapting to TCFD, that's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that's a guideline where it needs to go on an international basis in terms of reporting, but a lot of companies in Europe are also signing up to what's called a science-based target and getting their targets approved through the UN system, and that guides, like I said, their strategy going forward. And here's just real quick where you don't want to be and where companies want to go. So if you're on that scale, on the bottom, volatility, demand down, basically a company that has low risk but also low opportunity, you're being driven by the markets. You don't know your future really. If you have high risk but have not identified your opportunity, then over time you're probably going to go away as a company. demand is going to go down. So what all those companies need to do is probably go first to transformation, where you identify your high risk, what we saw before, but now you're on the way to creating an opportunity. And once you've done that, demand is up and your business is prospering. And here again, I said it, we'll go more into detail that, but if you look at Europe and in Turkey, we're sending out, CDP is sending out questionnaires to all the BIST 100 companies, and reporting is going well, but we also see that Turkish companies that are responding to CDP usually have a very close trade relationship with European countries and European companies, and so I think this is not a surprise, and because we are so interconnected, it also makes sense for Turkish companies to participate in these rules and to participate in the EU market rules. And I'll end with this one, where we all in this room have an important role to play. And this is just a summary of more or less where we're sitting. First of all, as we mentioned, we have business. Business needs to disclose, become transparent. Business needs to solve most of those issues really for us and with our help by creating better products and better services, by reinventing, disrupting their business in a sense. But we all help. First of all, with CDP through investor and asset managers, how we allocate capital, how we value those good companies, those leading companies. And public authorities by setting very clear rules, regulation, taxation, and giving the right incentives and the right subsidies, or scrapping the wrong subsidies and the wrong incentives. And then all the rest of us, non-governmental organizations, civil society, but NGOs such as CDP, we're trying to give guidance, support business, or other organizations that are more in the investigative or media or advocacy arena. So let me end by just expressing a huge thank you to Sabancı University, first of all, and you, Miran, in particular, for putting this event together with all of these distinguished participants and with the help of all the partners and sponsors, as well as Melsa Ararat, who for personal reasons unfortunately cannot be with us here today. Just really quickly, Melsa is also with Sabancı University. Melsa started CDP in Turkey over 9 years ago and has been the driving force behind our work here ever since. So teşekkür ederim, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.